Good morning, brethren. This is the morning sermon which I have prepared with the Lord. So, I will start by addressing one interesting thing I've noticed about God and about our world that the Lord wanted me to share with all of you. So, this is how I wrote it down. We have no power, only the ability to choose between a limited range of options. God watches our choices and then rewards as it pleases him. So, I will expound a bit on this point. So, a lot of people think that we have some kind of power, the power to do this or that, or the power to use our minds, or the power of our willpower, or the power to create things or imagine things, blah, 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 blah. But what I have observed is that in reality, we don't have any power at all. Power is like an ability to compel. It's like if I'm the king of a kingdom, I have the power to say, off with his head, or kill all the prophets of the Lord God of Israel, right? That's like a power, of course. That last one wouldn't be a good move, although it did happen. But now I'm getting off track. What I was trying to say was, we really don't have power at all. What we have are, at any moment, we have before us a limited range of options, right? Because it's not like we have the ability to choose anything, right? Like right now, as I'm doing the sermon, I can choose to stay on track, or I can choose to wander off, or I could choose to flip this coin right now. But for example, I can't choose to just shoot fireballs out of my hands, nor could I choose today to go start playing soccer for Real Madrid, etc., etc. So any given person, in any situation, if you think of it almost like a video game, you have before you like limited options, and you're free to pick any of those options. But you don't really have any power. All you can do is see the options before you and say, I'm going to pick this one, or I'm going to pick this one. And for each person, of course, you have very different options depending on your position in life, depending on your capacities, depending upon your circumstance. So in my way of describing it, really what it is that we have these limited options and we're always making choices. Right now, we choose this. A second later, we choose another thing, and we keep going. What really happens is that God, fully seeing our minds and hearts and fully knowing what the options we have before us, sees the choices that we're making. And based on the degree to which those choices please God, God then rewards us with his power and gives us different rewards or punishments depending on how much he likes our choices. And so, for example, I have really discovered that we really don't have the ability to just realize things. Even with all of our intellect or all of our intuition, we don't have the power to just realize the truth about things. But if we keep, and this is just one example, if we keep trying to and we keep struggling after truth and choosing within our limited option range, and God likes that, at the moment that he decides to, he can then just reward us by putting some realization into our mind, so to speak, or by just pointing us to something in the Bible, and then bam, now we see the truth. But it's wrong to say that we used our own power to see the truth. Really, we just made choices that made God happy, and as it pleases him, he says, check this truth out, zink. But you realize, or I'm realizing, it really just comes from God. He has the ability to reveal things when he wants to. And this isn't just true for realizing the truth. It's actually true with everything. All we can really do is just keep choosing the thing that pleases God. And of course, differing choices please God to differing degrees. So if you imagine at any given time, imagine that we have like, say, 10 options before us. And let's say that 5 are like on the side of good. They're like good degrees of good choices. And then 5 are like degrees of bad choices, depending on if we're choosing the worst of the bad choice or the best of the good choice or some intermix, because realistically, we all sort of bounce back and forth. God kind of just watches that ratio. And you could think of it like this. Once our, let's call it the score, reaches high enough by choosing particular things, God can just decide, bam, now you seemingly have this, now it's this. But it really just all comes from his power. It's so wrong to think that we ever have the power, because God can give or revoke anything at any moment as he chooses. And even the sort of rewards and punishments he gives us are very appropriate, right? So if we're choosing certain things that he likes, and we're clearly, our heart is seeking after a particular thing, he then will give us something like that thing, right? Like, imagine your whole life you're struggling to understand the truth. It wouldn't really make sense if he then like rewarded you with something that had nothing to do with that. Like, what if he then like rewarded you with a bunch of social approval or something? That wouldn't really make sense, because that wasn't really what you were seeking for. And similarly, vice versa, if there was somebody who their whole life was just like scoffed at and mocked and had nothing, and they just really wanted some people to approve of them and love them, it wouldn't make sense if he then gave them some strange, profound truth, because that wouldn't really be the thing that they were looking for. So the point I'm trying to make is he rewards you appropriately, because he knows what would make you happy and what you want, and he sees you making these choices. So I just wanted to start with that explanation, because more and more I've just realized that no matter what talents we have, no matter what abilities that we're born with that God has given us, it's really not within our power to achieve things. But if we make choices that please God, he can just do it, bam, out of nowhere at any moment, because he's God. Okay, that was the first point. Oh, so now the second note to touch on was, this is something fascinating, and I'll have to rewind back a little bit, but I wrote it down as the purpose behind some being left behind, because I had assumed for the first several months after I was reborn that, as many believe, that the entire church, everyone who is saved, would all be taken with the rapture. I'd assumed that was true. It seemed to make sense to me. But then recently, like a week ago, God starts revealing to me that that's not the case. And right away, I was curious, but what's the purpose behind that? Because one thing that I've observed with God is that everything he does is very purposeful. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to reward some and punish others. No, there's always a deeper purpose. In fact, to be honest, there's usually like 12 different branching deeper purposes within everything he does. Probably 12 billion, but I'm just saying, you can even see multiple ones are served. And so right away, as he's like revealing this to me, that like, no, it's not just like everyone in the whole church just gets raptured instantly. Right away, I started to think, but what's the purpose of it? And so I started pressing God, like, what's the purpose? What's the purpose? And he wouldn't really show me, right? Now, I've learned from experience that sometimes when he goes quiet, it's like he wants me to use my own imagination to start to try to figure it out and understand it. I think he likes to see that. And then after I've kind of thought about it for a while, I go back, I'm like, God, am I on the right track with this conception of it, this one? Then he sort of hints me towards the conception that is closer to the truth. Because obviously the pure truth, our brains can't even comprehend, but we can get kind of closer to it. So I was watching videos about it. I was trying to understand it, and I'm like, okay, so I'll express to you the closest understanding of it that I've got so far. What is the purpose of leaving some members of the church, some people who are saved, behind after the pre-tribulation rapture, which is occurring really soon? We won't go off into that. That's a different topic. I believe the purpose is simple: to evangelize. Because think of it like this. If you look from the very beginning of the Bible up till now, God always has evangelists on the earth. Even before Jesus Christ came, the center point of all history, God always had, whether they were prophets who were speaking his word, whether they were people showing how God is like through example, no matter how many forces of evil were on the earth, and at times it seemed like almost the whole earth was totally evil, God always had some people that he selected and preserved really to bring the news of what God is like. And of course, Jesus Christ is the preeminent supreme example of that. But both before and after Jesus, even when the forces of evil on the earth would be so strong, God would always balance it out by having like the apostles go, and he would always like empower those forces that represented him to keep showing the world about him. And of course, before Jesus came, much of the prophets were prophesying the coming of Jesus. Whether to the extent to which the prophets themselves even understood this, I don't know. And then after Jesus, a lot of his forces, like the apostles, were pointing back towards Jesus. So you can think of everything before Jesus pointed to Jesus. Everything after Jesus pointed back to Jesus, because Jesus is, of course, the center of the entire Bible and the way to actually know God personally. So, as I'm thinking about this, why would some of the church be left behind? Well, it's simple. Because we know that when the 7-year tribulation hits, the enemy is all like ready for it. The enemy has and if you don't realize that, oh man, the enemy is so ready during the tribulation. Because you would think if the tribulation just hit and was this big act of God, everybody on earth would be like, oh my God, God's real. Oh, the enemy is ready to counteract that like you wouldn't believe. I won't go into the stuff I've seen and stuff, but believe me, the enemy has, as God says, he will send a strong deception for the ones who reject his existence. When the 7-year tribulation falls, no doubt right away, a lot of people are going to be like, oh my God, the rapture, that was it. Oh, wow. But for the people that are on the fence, and a lot of people won't, who are like, I don't know, the enemy's going to have this whole package set up for them not to believe. And that, everybody's what the Antichrist and the false prophet do. But here's the interesting thing. So if the whole world, all the world governments, all the false stuff is all ready to deceive people away from Jesus and away from the Bible being literally true, well, when the 7-year tribulation starts, who's going to be pointing people towards it? Because we have the 2 witnesses, of course, but they're just 2 people operating in Jerusalem. So for the whole rest of the world, if all the governments, if the whole church is raptured, that means for 99.9% of the surface of the earth, it's just all the deceptors pointing you towards deception. If that were the case, it's like everyone would just fall into deception. There has to be some force around which is saying, no, it's lies, don't listen to the government, which is doing what the 2 witnesses are doing, which is saying, don't believe the government, it's all lies, this is the tribulation, look at the Bible, right? And of course, when the 7-year tribulation starts, they're going to make Christianity illegal, they're going to take Bibles, because the enemy knows how to hide the truth. That's what he's trying to do. There have to be more than just 2 people on the earth who are spreading the gospel and so on. Now you'd say, what about the 144,000 evangelists? All my communications with God have been him saying they come in the second half of the 7-year tribulation. So I believe they're since we know they're all Jewish, they're genetically Jewish, they're from the 12 tribes. I assume they're operating either in Jerusalem or right around there in Israel. So what about the whole rest of the world? Because some people say, oh, the 7-year tribulation, it's just about the Jews. No, we see right in the beginning of Book of Revelation that suddenly all these people appear in heaven of all nations and tongues and kindreds. And when the elder says, where'd all these people come from? John says, thou knowest. And the elder says, yes, they're the ones who came out of great tribulation and have washed their robes white in the blood of the Lamb, which we know means they've been saved by believing in Jesus, John 3:16. And they're of all nations, kindreds, tongues. So they're not just Jews. So there are people spread all around the world. So how did they come to faith in Jesus if they were living in, say, South America, and all the church is just raptured away, and then all the government institutions, all the evil is just pointing you to the false prophet, pointing you to the Antichrist? How would all these people in, say, South America who hadn't been saved before, how would they come to faith in Jesus? There has to be some forces left in that area that are just as the strong delusion is trying to be like, look away from the Bible, basically tricking you into going to hell. Well, there's got to be some people left from the church who are saying, even if it's in secret and are whispering like, I still have a Bible, you can come to my house and read it, this is all lies. Plus, the Antichrist gets revealed at the beginning of the 7-year tribulation. Bam, the restrainer is removed, and now the Antichrist can appear. There have to be some people saying, like, don't listen to him, he's the Antichrist, And who are those people? They're people who, in my way of describing it, were saved before, and you can describe it however you want, but they're people who know the faith, who know the truth, right? Because those people have to be around, especially if they're people who've had experience for years. But now we're going to go back to the first point. Everything God does is so purposeful. There's purpose on multiple layers. So why are some going to be left behind? Well, the first thing is so there's people that can evangelize. Now, don't worry. Those people are saved, meaning when they die, they will go to heaven, right? Once you're saved, you can't be unsaved. Salvation depends upon the strength of Jesus, not our strength. If it did depend on our strength, we would lose it because we don't have the power to overcome the devil with our own strength, but Jesus does. That's why once we're saved, no matter how much the devil strikes, we fall prey to the devil all the time. In fact, I'm going to address that later, how I fell prey to the devil yesterday during the video. But that's a later point. Now we're going to stay on track, right? And now I just already went too far off track because I forgot what I was just saying. Yes, so we'll reset here. So there's so much purpose to what God does. I believe that God needs to leave some of the church behind because they will act as evangelists and they will help save souls. And of course, they will still go to heaven, but they may have to endure for a time in the 7-year tribulation. Some of them may be killed, but not all of them necessarily will be. That's why there's another rapture at the midpoint. So the ones who are killed, in a way, they're fortunate to be killed because then they die and now they wake up in heaven. Whereas, so imagine if the 7-year tribulation starts and you're just like, I'm not going to give up my Bible. Christ is Lord. I declare him before men. And then the government comes and shoots you. It's like, oh, now you're dead and now you wake up in heaven and you're a martyr. So you get more rewards in heaven. If you don't think you get, heaven has different levels. There's different levels of reward. If you don't believe me, ask God yourself about it. Because look at the purpose behind that. If there weren't differing levels of reward in heaven, then you could get saved, right? You get saved and then you're like, cool, I'm saved. I'm going to go out, commit tons of sins, never even mention the gospel, just totally be part of the world. I know I'll be in heaven. Great. And technically that's true. You will end up in heaven. But imagine there's another person. They get saved and they're like, I'm going to evangelize to everyone. I'm going to get mocked and scoffed at. I'm going to deny myself. I'm going to bear my cross. I'm never going to shut up about Jesus. You really think that God takes those two people and then just gives them the exact same reward? In my opinion, that wouldn't be very just, right? Imagine that one person who just gets saved, dedicates their life to Jesus, endures so much, gets martyred, but then the other person's just like, oh, cool, I'm saved. I'm assured to be in heaven. Awesome. I'm going to go out to casinos and just commit every sin. And hey, I know I'll be in heaven. You really think both those? So the one guy gets martyred. The second guy is like, calls himself Sin Daddy. But I know I'll be in heaven, gets a tattoo, like no matter how many sins I commit, salvation depends upon Jesus. Whoa, just starts going wild, committing like every sin. And of course, he would probably live a great life on earth because Satan's the Lord of sin. And that guy probably starts some crazy church, tells everyone to commit sins, and people in the church would love it. And then, does all that stuff. Then the other guy, becomes like the most zealous. He's like, now that I'm saved, I must do everything I can to be like Jesus, just gets attacked at every point by Satan. Everyone scoffs at him. Eventually he gets martyred. Now both those people show up in heaven and then God's like, guess what? You're both saved by Jesus. Same reward. There you go. Then imagine the conversation between those two people. The guy's like, yep, on earth they called me Sin Daddy. Imagine they meet and the guy who got martyred is like, oh my God, I'm in heaven. Oh Lord, thank you. And then God's like, yep, go off into that section. You guys get to know each other. And so the one guy's like, yep, I denied myself in every way. I endured countless suffering trying to follow the example of Jesus. And I was beaten, and then they scoffed me, and then they did it again, and then Satan attacked me in this way, and then Satan gave me a twisted disease, and then the government threw me in jail. Yep, but now I'm in heaven. Oh, it's glorious. So what's your story? And the other guy's like, well, I was saved 20 years ago. I realized salvation depends on grace, not on works. So I opened a church called the Sin Daddy Church, and I got 6 million tattoos, and then I started. Imagine the other guy's like, really? Imagine how awkward it would be. Yep, but now we're both in heaven. Imagine how the person who got martyred would start to be like, did I misinterpret something here? The point is, imagine how unfair that would be. If you don't see how that would be unfair or unjust, well, maybe you don't, and that's your view. But my thought would be like, wow, that would be a little bit awkward when then God reappears and is like, so, because you guys know in heaven you can ask God stuff more directly. Then imagine God reappears, so do you have any questions? Imagine the guy who got martyred is just like, my Lord, just imagine how awkward that would be. The Sin Daddy guy's like, I'm in heaven, I ain't got no questions. Yeah, this is great. Too bad we don't have blah, 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 blah here. Just imagine the awkwardness of that scenario. Now, I'm not saying that something like that would occur. In fact, what I'm saying is there's reasons why there's different levels in heaven. And, but again, take this to the Lord. If you don't believe me, there's also differing levels in hell. See that in hell, even in the Bible, we see some of the fallen angels being like, don't send us into the abyss, the lowest level, right? There's differing levels in hell. There's differing levels in heaven. And it makes sense because that should encourage us on earth to give our full hearts to God, to serve Jesus, to endure the trials and tribulations, to seek to give more, not to such a degree that we just break down and it goes crazy. I've had moments when I was like, God, I want to make even more videos. God, and I almost started going to a ridiculous degree, and God's like, okay, Evan, relax a little bit, so we shouldn't use it as a way to almost destroy ourselves, so zealous we just go crazy. If we do, God actually sort of punishes us for that and is like, oh, okay now. So that's the point I wanted to make there. I think I basically addressed that point about the differing levels. So anyway, the people that get left behind, I'll just address one more issue on that whole subject, which is also that, think of it this way too. It's also like a reward. The pre-tribulation rapture is like a reward. As we see, Paul the Apostle says he prays every day to be accounted worthy of it. He's doing all this work. So he clearly knows that it's not something that everyone just gets by default. He's hustling and working hard and doing all this great work for the Lord because he wants to be accounted worthy to be taken by that sweet pre-tribulation rapture. So look at the reward aspect of it too. God knows everyone's hearts. God knows all the works everyone has done, right? And imagine if you have, again, the people who, upon being saved or really start working for the Lord, really start bringing the gospel, I'm just going to have to say this, they're going to take, and you guys watching the channel, a lot of you know this, they're going to take a lot more flack. If you get saved and you're just like, cool, well, I'm saved, now I'll just go back into the regular worldly life. I'll read the Bible once a month or something, and cool, I'll mostly just party and live in the world and not even think about it. You're going to live a comfortable life, right? But the person who's like, I'm going to give everything to this, you're going to start getting beaten. You're going to start going out evangelizing. You're going to start, spiritual warfare is going to come against you. A lot of you guys know this. You're going to get burned out, worn down a lot more than the person who doesn't really evangelize, just goes along with it, right? And so it's also like a reward because God knows those people who are getting beaten down, who are getting burned out, who are just still giving, who it's just their whole life. And so the pre-tribulation rapture is like an evacuation for those people. Jesus looks down and knows persons A, B, and C, they're saved, but then they just went off into the world and are basically, in some ways kind of serving Satan, how much they are aware of it, who knows? But Jesus also knows persons D, E, and F, wow, they're just giving it all. They're getting burned out. They're taking a lot of pain, a lot of damage, just like Jesus did, not literally just like him, but, the more you act like Jesus, the more you follow his example, you are going to get beaten more by the world. You are going to absorb more pain for the sake of Jesus and the gospel. So Jesus looks down and he knows which people have done that. He sees some people are just almost gone. They're just giving so much. And that's when pre-tribulation rapture, he's like, okay, take those people. They've given everything. Then persons A, B, and C, you haven't. He's sort of like, hey, you weren't watching. You weren't paying attention. Now you're left behind. Don't worry, you'll still get to heaven. But now you get to do the work during the tribulation period. Does that make sense? It's like the people who chose to do it before the Great Tribulation are getting burned out, but then Jesus is like, okay, reward, you're evacuated, you're in heaven already. And then he looks down at all the people who weren't, and he's like, guess what? Should have been watching the signs, should have been, paying attention. You're left behind. Don't despair. You're still going to end up in heaven, but now is your time to do a little work. It's like a little kick in the, time to work now. And of course, it's also good for those people who get left behind because now they have a chance to build up more credit levels in heaven. Because, I asked God about this too. It's like heaven's eternal. It goes on eternally. Earlier, I had asked God, this was months ago, I'm like, God, so once we get in heaven, is there any chance to move up in our category in heaven? Guys, I'm going to have to tell you the answer I got. No. What we do here on earth in this limited time is what determines that. Just like when we're in hell, there's no way to get out of hell. When you're in heaven, but you can't just be like, okay, now I'm in heaven. Now I'll work for the Lord. It's like, no. The Lord determines your position in heaven by what you did during your finite time on this earth. And I have to say, when the Lord told me that, it really motivated me to hustle while I'm on the earth because it's so I hope that makes sense. But that's why it's good for those left behind because it's like, look, imagine Jesus says it kind of like this. He's like, look, up till now, you weren't exactly building up a lot of status points in heaven because, salvation's a free gift that they receive from Jesus. And that's the most important thing because now they'll be in heaven eternally. You can almost think of it, Jesus like saying, little surprise, you got caught sleeping, and, you're now in the tribulation. I know it's rough, but the good thing about it is now you can work a lot for the Lord, and by enduring what they endure during the tribulation, possibly getting martyred, maybe not, they're now helping to bring a lot more souls to Jesus by showing an example to the deceived world that there are still some Christians who fight. Plus, they'll know the rapture hit. And when all the deceiver forces are like, oh, aliens came, there's got to be some people left behind to be like, no, it was the rapture, da da da. And of course, government's going to go after them. And I don't know all details, but it's going to be rough. But anyone who does get left behind should take comfort in knowing that in that period before you get martyred or before you get taken by the mid-tribulation rapture, which, look, the most it could be is 3.5 years. So either you get martyred sooner, you wake up in heaven, or if you somehow hide out in the woods, don't get martyred, whatever it is, it's going to be an epic adventure. It could be only 3.5 years is the longest it could be, 1,260 days, because then the mid-tribulation rapture kicks in then, and that will take the people like left behind. I mean, I guess technically there it could somehow go to the, I don't even think that's going to happen. No, I think if you get left behind and you're saved in the first half of the tribulation, you'll get taken by the mid-trib rapture. So just know, if anyone who does get left behind, it won't last that long. And what you're doing during that period, let's say it goes on for a year and then you get martyred, well, probably going to be the hardest year of your life. But think of all the ascension points you're scoring in heaven for doing that, right? For enduring that, so that's why even if you get left behind, dude, you could still get even higher credit points by being like, government's going to come for me. I'm going to go out in the woods. I'm going to bring food to others. I'm going to make underground Samizdat Bibles. Samizdat was like during the communist system. They would like copy these like illegal information packets. You could do that with the scripture. You could fight against it. Dude, it's like an awesome action adventure. And eventually when they come and martyr you or whatever, you go out showing courage, confessing our Lord Jesus. And, then you show up in heaven and it's like, maybe God could even show you, if I had just raptured you with the pre-tribulation rapture, your ranking in heaven would have been like here. If this is the lowest rank, like your rank would be here, which is still way better than hell, right? But maybe God will show you, because you got left behind, went a year, and then got martyred, your rank is like here. And now for eternity, you get to enjoy this. Now, anything in heaven is great. If you just get in by the skin of your teeth, you're in heaven for eternity. It's amazing. But this is like even more amazing. This is like ridiculously amazing. And I don't think in heaven anyone's envious or jealous of each other. I think if you get in here, you see there's people here, well, you probably are just like, they're awesome. Wherever I get in, I'm going to look up. There's going to be people higher than me, and I'm going to be like, those dudes are awesome, right? I'm just sort of imagining what it's like, obviously with my mortal imagination, very flawed, but I'm just trying to give a encouraging picture. And yeah, I hope that helps. And that's that. Let these words comfort you, but also if anyone gets left behind who sees this, realize God doesn't give me a list of who's going to get left behind or not. Okay, I don't know. It's a lot of information he won't tell me. But if somehow you do get left behind after seeing this, just know that, one, your life is now an epic action movie. Government's coming hard at you. You get to move. It's going to be intense, baby. It's going to be wild. I know for a fact at least one person seeing this is like, yeah, that person is going to be ready, baby. That's the glory. Because remember, what was Jesus' glorification? His crucifixion. The pain we endure, those hard moments when it's coming, baby. We're fighting the world. Evil's there. That's painful. That's suffering. But that's what glorifies God. And in the end, if we really glorify God, God shares his glory with us. The ultimate example being Jesus, the most glorified person there ever was. His mere name is known everywhere. No one ever could, would, or should be more glorified than Jesus, because he gave the ultimate and endured for all of us, endured the most suffering, and thus God glorified him like no one you would ever believe. But if you ask Jesus, Jesus would say that was all glorifying our Father. Okay, I haven't actually asked Jesus that, but I'm imagining, if you try to say, Jesus, you're the most glorified one ever, Jesus, I'm imagining he might even rebuke you and say, thou knowest already, our Father is the glorified one ever. So that's a way to think of it. Okay, guys, I'm going to break the video here, and then I'll make a second video with the second half. I love you guys, and I hope that is helpful. Amen.